Hey everybody. Today we're going to go through and start a little bit of geometry because that's going to be the next big unit that we're going to be focusing on. So I'm going to review just some basic geometry, vocabulary, types of angles and things like that. We'll talk about parallel, perpendicular lines. And then in the coming days, we'll branch out and we'll be doing some more with geometry. So these vocabulary words hopefully will come back to you just like riding a bike. You may not have heard of them in a while or worked with them lately, but hopefully after I go through and explain it, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember that from a previous math class. But if not, here it is now, so hopefully you'll get it this time. So first we have vertical angles. Two angles whose sides form two pairs of opposite rays. They are always equal. So I have a picture over here. So I have intersecting lines. Angle 1 and angle 2 are vertical angles. Angle 3 and angle 4 are vertical angles. So these are vertical angles. So I like to think of like an X, like they're like on top of each other. So if you make an X across, then the ones across from each other are vertical angles, and then the ones across from each other are vertical angles. Next, we have adjacent angles, two coplanar angles with a common side, a common vertex, and no common interior points. So this is an example of adjacent angles. Angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent to each other. And here is another example of adjacent angles. Angle 3 and angle 4 are adjacent to each other. So I like to think of these as being like beside each other. So that's the word, quote unquote, that I think of. So these are across from each other, and vertical angles are congruent. So these are across from each other, and then adjacent angles are beside each other. Next, we got complementary angles. All right. Next, we have complementary angles. Two angles whose measures have a sum of 90 degrees. So 90 degrees is complementary. So I have a picture over here, makes a right angle because a right angle is 90 degrees. Angle 1 and angle 2 are complements of each other. So whatever angle 1 is, if I add that to angle 2, when I add those two together, it should give me 90 degrees. Another example of complementary angles, angle A is 40 degrees and angle B is 50 degrees. So these two angles are also complements of each other. So if you add two angles, add them up, if it gives you 90 degrees, they are complementary angles. Next, we have supplementary angles. So complementary is 90, supplementary is 180. So supplementary, two angles whose measures have a sum of 180 degrees. Over here, angle 1 and angle 2 are supplements of each other. If this is 100 and that's 80, if add them together, it gives me 180 degrees. I have another example over here, two separate angles. Angle A is 75 degrees. Angle B is 105 degrees. When I add these two angles together, they equal 180 and they are supplements of each other. Sometimes students mix up complementary and supplementary. Complementary is 90. Supplementary is 180. To help you remember, it goes in alphabetical order and numerical order. So C comes first in the alphabet and 90 comes first before you get to 180. So supplementary is second after C, and then 180 comes after 90. So they go in alphabetical order, C, S, and then they go numerical order, 90, 180. So make sure that you don't mix those up. Complementary is 90 and supplementary is 180. The last type of angle is congruent angles. They have the same angle measure in degrees or radians. So radians will be coming in a little bit. It's just another way to measure angles. But for right now, I know you're very familiar with degrees. So congruent angles have the same degree measure. This one is 110 and so is this one. So congruent means the same. If one was 50 degrees, the other one will be 50 degrees. So this is just a recap. Like I said, hopefully you remember these. We have vertical angles. They are congruent to each other and think of them as being across. We have adjacent angles that are beside each other and they share a common side. Complementary, sum to 90. Supplementary, sum to 180. And then congruent angles equal one another. So we're going to go through and take a look at a couple of examples, just using some of these words here and some of the things that we know. Then after we do that, we'll go through and take a look at parallel lines being cut by transversal. right, so example 1. They give us this picture here. So we got two intersecting lines. I know that the space over here is 40 degrees, and we need to go find angle A, angle B, and angle C. So we want to find the measure of all three of those. Now, a few things that I know looking at this picture, I know that this angle and this angle are vertical angles. They are across from each other and they are congruent to each other. So if this is 40 degrees, across from it must also be 40 degrees. So I know that angle B is 40 degrees. And might not be able to see that too well, so I'm going to use this one. So this is 40 degrees. So that's something that I know. I know that the measure of angle B is 40 degrees. Now, I could take a couple of other approaches to find A and to find C. So I know that these two angles together sum to 180 degrees, and they are supplementary angles. So I know that C plus 40 equals 180. I know that A plus 40 equals 180. And I know that B plus A equals 180 and B plus C equals 180. So that's one approach that I can go. I can go that way. Or I know that this is a circle. So I'm going to try to kind of air draw it with my pen here. I'm kind of making a circular motion. And there are 360 degrees in a circle. So I could add these two up, subtract from 360, and divide by 2 because these are vertical angles. So we have some different approaches. I'm going to use the approach that I know that these are supplementary angles. So C plus 40 equals 180. 180 minus 40 is 140. So I know that this is 140 degrees. I know that C and A are vertical angles. So if this is 140, this is also 140 degrees. And just like that, we found the measure of A, B, and C. So if I add all these up, it makes a circle. There's 360 degrees in a circle, so I can go that approach. Or I know that angles right beside each other are supplementary angles, and so they're going to equal 180 degrees. Okay, another one that we can take a look at. So this picture we're going to be studying in more detail in just a minute. So I have two parallel lines cut from a transversal. So which of the following pairs of angles are vertical angles? Remember, vertical angles are across from each other. So W and Z. So here's W and there's Z. So they definitely look like they're vertical angles. Let me zoom in a little bit there for us. So W and Z are across from each other. So let's hold on to that. W and T. So this is W right here, and T is way up there. So they definitely are not vertical angles. S and Z. S is up here, and Z is down here. So they are not vertical angles. And then T and Y. T is up here, and Y is down here. So the answer to this one is A. And I know that because W and Z are right across from one another. So W and Z are right across from one another. Now, this picture, as I said, we're going to study in a little more detail. Way back in Math 2, I believe, you took a look at parallel lines being cut from a transversal. So this is the picture that you studied a lot in Math 2. Parallel lines, they lie in the same plane and they do not intersect. A transversal is a line that intersects two coplanar lines at two distinct points. Many angles are formed in the same when this happens. So right here, I have two parallel lines. M and N are parallel to each other. So these arrows mean parallel. They're going in the same direction and they will not intersect. They are parallel. So line M and line N are parallel to one another. Line L is the transversal. So this line right here is the line that is cutting my angle in half. So that is my, not cutting in half per se, but going through both of my lines. So that's my transversal line. Now I have some things down here. Let's see if I can zoom out. We'll go one at a time and make sure we can understand what angles are which. So we already talked about that M and N are parallel. And L is the line that's cutting it. It's the transversal. Now, there are so many different sets of vertical angles in this one picture. There are a lot of different sets of vertical angles. A and D, C and B, E and H, G, and F. So all of those are vertical angles as we studied in our first set of vocabulary words. They are across from each other and they are congruent to each other. Notice this one's 62, this one's 62. This one's 118, this one's 118, etc., and so on. Next, we have corresponding angles. So corresponding angles are next. So corresponding angles are A and E. So A is in the top spot in this pod, so to speak, and E is in the top spot in this pod. So same position, different location. B and F are corresponding angles. So here's B up here, and there's F right there. So these two are corresponding angles. Notice corresponding angles are congruent. They're both 62 degrees. C and G are corresponding angles. So there's C and there's G. So these are corresponding angles. And then D and H are corresponding angles. Next, we have alternate interior angles. So I am going to zoom in on the picture and just kind of point to some things. So we may not, I was trying to see the words and the picture at the same time, but it's not going to work out. So alternate interior angles, C and F. So these are my inside angles. C and F are alternate interior angles. C and F are alternate interior angles. D and E are also alternate interior angles. So if these are the four inside, that means that A, B, G, and H are both outside angles. So A and H are alternate exterior angles. B and G are alternate exterior angles as well. And notice they are congruent to one another. A is congruent to H, B is congruent to G, C is congruent to F, D is congruent to E. So your alternate interior and exterior angles are congruent to each other. And the last type of angle that we have are consecutive interior angles. Consecutive means in order beside each other. So inside angles, these are my four inside angles. C plus E are consecutive interior angles, and they sum to 180 degrees. 62 plus 118, they are consecutive interior angles and equal 180 degrees. Same with D and F. So D and F are consecutive interior angles and they sum to 180 degrees. So draw your picture down if you haven't yet. And these are all the vocabulary words that go with the picture. So there we go. I might be able to, I can squeeze them all in there. So you definitely want to make sure you write these down in your notes or take a picture. Of course, pause it if I go on by the time that you're not finished writing. Feel free to pause it. It's a video. So these are the different words and angles you should be able to recognize based off of this picture. Two parallel lines cut from a transversal. So we've been looking at parallel lines. The last thing I want to take a look at are perpendicular lines, which are very straightforward. Hopefully you remember them from way back when. So perpendicular lines, lines that intersect to form 90-degree angles. So perpendicular lines are lines that intersect to form a right angle. So I have a picture down here, intersecting lines. Most of the time you'll have this little box thing here that lets you know it's a right angle. So those are perpendicular lines. All right, so we've gone over, again, this is just some basic geometry. We took a look at vertical angles, adjacent angles, complementary and supplementary angles, and congruent angles. And then we just went through and looked at the different kind of angles that are made from a transversal cutting through two parallel lines. Now, this is your homework that will be up on Canvas for you to work on. So the first picture you're going through, you need to tell me something that's supplementary to angle AOD. So you need to know what supplementary is. Go back and look at your notes that hopefully you wrote down. Number two, I want something adjacent and congruent to angle AOE. Again, we're using this picture right here to help us out. Three, something supplementary to angle EOA. 4, something complementary to angle EOD. And number 5, you need to list out any pair of vertical angles from this picture. And then down here, you have some problems that you need to go through and solve for X and Y. So you're looking for your missing angle values here. You're going to have to know things like, for example, number 6, these are vertical angles. So vertical angles are congruent to one another. So you need to set these equal to each other. So that's where you're going to be using your knowledge of the angles to figure out what to do. Number 7, I know that these two are congruent to each other because they're vertical angles. So et cetera and so on. And then these two beside each other, these are supplementary angles. So that's going to add to 180. So just giving you some little hints, right? You are using the angles that I discussed in this video to help you with your problems for your Canvas assignment.